Um, so remembering my perfect Sunday afternoon on the lawn of Asgard, eating an apple, and
not just eating apples though, were they?
oh, you mean the like the best game in the world ever?
Well, I guess that depends from what perspective you're looking at it with.
Well, who are the losers? Who are the losers, right? Baldur's not a loser. Neither are the Aesir. It's weapons training, and no one gets hurt.
Well, that's true, but then when it came to throwing tables and chairs, you know, there was definitely a loser of who owned those tables and chairs.
Yeah, but well, you've got to give the Einrahar something to do. They can't just knock lumps out of each other every day and get drunk at the evenings. They've got to do a bit of carpentry as well.
Now, let's be honest, it did get a bit out of hand. I mean, on the scale of 0 to Ragnarok.
Well, it is getting pretty close to Ragnarok, isn't it? And ricochets. Baldur might have been invulnerable, but how many times did like an axe bounce off and go where it shouldn't have?
Yes, there was a lot of this.
and like this invulnerability, right? Did things bounce off Baldur, or did they just stick in and then he could pull them out? Was it a safety invulnerability?
I think it was that they bounced off. I mean, I did not partake in the game, obviously, now myself. But from my understanding is they just bounced off. And there's a thing, where did these items go?
Yeah, just unloading a quiver full of arrows and then hunting around.
I mean, it sounds to me like there was no elfin safety.
I don't know, maybe Freya stepped in every now and then to calm them down.
It was an interesting time that led to the saddest of events.
Yeah. Now, you have the memory of these things clearer in your mind than I do. I got like big grand concepts of that, but like, is it Baldur's dream? Like, what was he dreaming of?
He had terrible dreams of someone chasing him, and he would wake in a sweat. And he told his mother, Freya, Frigg, he would tell his mother Frigg, and she told Odin, and Odin found this very disturbing. And you know what Odin did? He travelled to hell to seek wisdom.
Yeah, I guess being a gallows god, he gets a bit preoccupied with death, doesn't he? So did he travel to the edges of the known worlds and to, is it Niflheim or the Borderlands?
Yep, and he travels a bit of an adventure. But on his way to speak to this wise witch, this wise seeress who lives in a burial mound, he sees something quite disturbing. He sees a hall, and it looks like it's readying for a guest.
Yeah, normally readying a hall for a guest is a joyful occasion, but when the hall is in the land of the dead, then that doesn't bode well for the guest.
It does not, but it does stir up some interesting conversations, because hell is such a terrible place that some seem to think, why are there feasting halls and beautiful decorations and tables and chairs and delicious food?
Well, if you're feasting off a plate called famine with a knife called hunger, then that's a different sort of feasting hall. The Greeks, is it the Elysium Fields? It's a pale shadow of life as we know it. Hades, there's eating in Hades, in his realm. But if you eat, then you get bound there and you can't leave again. Persephone found that one out to her cost. Mm-hmm. And that's the source of infertility in... So, or maybe you want a little bit of infertility in your life. Some people do, you know. It's
that's a common thread that's woven through the threads of time. It's yeah, but it depends, I guess, on how much of the story we want to reveal. But he speaks to this. He he awakens this witch, the seeress, from her burial mound, and she gives him chilling news. And obviously he uses Sleipnir to return home, the fastest horse in all the 9 realms.
There's cool stories about Sleipnir, aren't there?
Well, that's what there are.
Like, oh, so which one do you? Which one's best? There's like Sleipnir, like where Sleipnir comes from, and then there's another one where Odin and the giant race horses, isn't there?
My favourite is let's be honest, we all want to know how an 8-legged horse comes into existence. That's not an everyday occurrence, Cathbad. I don't know about you, but I've never seen an 8-legged horse running through the fields.
Early in the morning, when you wake up and you look out and somebody's out for an early morning ride, 8 legs on a horse.
What? Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, and Sleipnir has an interesting father.
Yeah, aye. There's a whole conversation about that in the realm of marvelous stories. But yeah, so should we reveal the father of Sleipnir? Most people will know the father of Sleipnir, but maybe they can work it out if we talk about some of his other children.
Oh, the monstrous children. Oh.
Well, an 8-legged horse is a monster.
But then Sleipnir did not carry out some of the deeds that these other children did.
True. So is it Fenrir or Fenris, or does it change?
It seems to change depending on what you read. There seems to be a lot of difference between Old Icelandic pronunciation, Old Norse, and when it's converted into English. It seems to be a bit of both. I tend to say Fenrir, but I know lots of people say Fenris, and I'll be honest, sometimes I use them interchangeably. Let's face it, we all know who we're talking about. A giant, terrifying wolf. But he wasn't always terrifying. He was a little cub.
A little puppy.
A little puppy, so much so that the gods deemed him no threat, and they actually kept him in Asgard as a pet.
Yeah, they were a little cautious about feeding him, though. Only like one of them was brave enough, I think. Is it Tyr?
Yeah, this one.
Aye, Tyr of the one hand. Yeah.
He was mighty, he just needed one hand.
Yeah.
And they bond, didn't they? Because Tyr hand fed the wolf cub, they had a bond, which led to it being quite tragic.
Yeah, the hand fed takes on a new meaning.
Truly, yeah.
Okay, so the other wolves I get confused with sometimes are also low-key children. So you've got Fenris, and he's one of almost triplets with the giantess. Yeah.
Fenris is Loki's child with Angrboda. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he's got Jormungandr.
Jormungandr. Jormungandr.
And then he's got Hel or Hela.
Which confuses people no end, because Hel we think is a place, but Hel is also her name. But she is really interesting because she's written as being blue, really tends to be the description I've read on one half, and then a maiden on the other.
See, there's something I've often wondered about. Which half? Because if blue is like frostbite and death, well, as in or like corpse, then people sometimes think left and right. There's a big left-right distinction. But what if it's top and bottom?
Or even extremities and the centre. I mean, half and half, it's, who knows?
If you wanted to describe a being where it's kind of the opposite of Frigg or Freya and the opposite of fertility, then maybe dead on the inside, but beautiful on the outside. Uh, Although you wouldn't really have a visual grasp of that. Um, uh, but if it's like a juxtaposition of beauty and death, uh, then it might be like looking out at the frost on a beautiful morning and seeing all the shapes and the spires, but then thinking of glaciers that are coming down the mountain, unstoppable, like an ice age waiting to uh, um, rewind the stretch that brought about Gunning and the creation and the yawning void from which things come.
It's interesting though that the other two children are they do terrible deeds, but Hel doesn't seem to have that darkness.
Is it almost as if the poet is in love with death?
That's true, that is true. But yeah, the three monstrous children, and each of them have a path that they take and a role that they play that eventually brings us to the end of all things.
Where Hel has a role,
They all know.
she's storing up those that die. Like Ran takes her net and draws up those who drown in the sea. Hel has those who die at home. Um, who else winds up in the realm of Hel?
Well, this is the thing. The written, this is where things get really interesting. The written text is so limited, I think, in terms of a clear explanation of the nine worlds. I think that people went to different places depending on their lives. Every god has his own hall. So what's to say that people didn't go to different places? You know, and we seem to think. I think there's a lot of the. We've got to remember it was a Christian scholar who wrote down the stories. So it's not that he necessarily had a slant. I don't think he did on purpose, because he was obviously so passionate about these stories. He's the reason that we have them, which is amazing. But I think modern people, when they hear the word hell, because it's such a strong, striking word and series of thoughts in our society, it's naturally to subconsciously place modern leanings on that word, I think.
Yeah, it's a modern idea that hell is a place of punishment, and it's drawing on a particular part of hell from Greek mythology, where key characters who've overconsumed in life are then punished by having things out of their reach.
And I don't think that's. I think it was kind of a sweep up place. Because it talks about, and I'm sure I've read one of the stories where it says about her taking care of people. I'll need to find out what story that one was in, because I've started reading the Gesta Danorum, and I'm trying to find all the Viking god stuff in the Saxo Grammaticus's writing. I've got it on my Kindle. I wish I had the actual paper book, because I can't highlight and put post-it notes in a Kindle. But yeah, it's so spread. The mythology is so spread across time and books and places and manuscripts that I don't think we'll ever have a complete understanding of it.
Oh yeah, and like you mentioned, the author Snorri, I think you were meaning.
Yep.
He explicitly, I think, yeah, you're right. He is passionate about the stories, because he writes at one point that the reason he's telling the stories is that unless you understand the stories, then you can't understand the poetry. And if you want to learn the poetry, you need to learn the stories. Although he doesn't himself believe in the Aesir as entities, he wants people to understand poetry, and therefore, so it's in a way it's a kind of neutral. As much he's not. I don't think he's got a motive in reporting them differently, although everybody tells things as they see them.
Yeah, definitely not a conscious motive at all. But then we all have a perspective, I guess, a subconscious perspective that we don't realise that we have.
Oh, yeah, and even there are tantalizing records of that playing out in the Viking era. Like, there's a story that I want to look up that I haven't found, which is Odin and Frey having a riddle competition.
Yeah.
And Odin, master of words and poetry, loses to Frey. Um, and there's a suggestion that that is perhaps maybe it's the war between the Aesir and the Vanir carrying on, but in their uh, their adherence.
There it goes away. Yeah. There's so many stories that aren't full stories as we would understand them now, though. The one where I can't remember where Thor's going, he's trying to get across, and a ferryman won't come and let him across. So he basically yells, yells at a ferryman across for ages and ages and ages, and he never gets his own way. And then he has to take the long way home in a bad mood. And it's kind of, there's no beginning, middle, end. There's no payoff. There's no what we'd expect from a story. So it's hard to understand, is the story incomplete? Is the story lost in translation? Or is that how stories were? It's really hard.
Yeah, it's a character sketch. Oh, Snorri wrote about that, and I read it recently, and I can't remember. Because he's talking about kennings. He's talking about, I think.
Love kenning.
So a thing, a word can have its meaning, but then it can have its meaning in the story. So like, you could call a traveler, but then if you referred in a poem to the traveler who couldn't summon the ferryman, then anyone who knows that story of Thor knows you're talking about Thor.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's a bit like playing riddle games. And people can listen to the meter and the sort of quality of your voice, but also their head is thinking through and remembering all the bits of story that link in. That they need to understand the poem to work out what you're actually saying.
Yeah, so like would the closest that we have nowadays to a kenning be kind of similar to a metaphor or a simile?
Yeah, I guess.
Not directly, but there's similarities there. Like we would use those phrases to describe someone, but it's a long-winded or more decorative way of saying something.
Yep.
Ah.
So we could try a little, if you wanted, to tell a story without naming things. Like Loki's child, swimmer in the field of grass, Odin's 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 courier, no, Odin's chariot, Odin's speed. Do you know who I'm talking about? Would that work?
Odin's speed, Sleipnir?
Yeah. So, yeah, Loki's child, swimmer on the sea of grass, and then, yeah, the last one I was stuck on, like relating the relationship between Sleipnir and Odin, because Odin's chariot's not quite right, but he doesn't have any other chariot. Not like golden like the sun.
That would be Baldur.
Golden like the sun, carrier to feasts rather than consumed at feasts. Bristling. Yeah, bristling skin of gold. Start with the gold and go back to the gold. Who would that be?
carried, but Baldur, if he's carried, Baldur gets carried to a feast because he's dead.
But I was thinking more for general purpose travel when the thin planked ship isn't available.
Oh, he's Golden Boar, Gullenbursty.
Yeah. That's Freysbor, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Freysbor. Although I recently found out that there's other boars. I was reading about other battle boars, which is incredible. We need to know more about battle boars.
Yeah, well, maybe they cruised down to Burghead, picked up a boar, and took it back.
There's just so many wonderful things. I love this whole creation out of destruction thing, and it spans across so many mythologies. This is why I've started reading other mythologies, because I'm really interested to see how often this creation destruction thing plays out. But yeah.
That was a pretty good run. I think out of that, if I go back and start looking for 1 minute segments, I mean, I was enjoying the story a lot, so it's quite possible.
Yeah, really, 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 it's good fun. It's amazing what you think of when you start talking about stories. Out of all of the stories, all of the mythology stories about gods, what do you have a favourite?
There's a story about a god who takes on human form for the salvation of the world. That gives understanding to my entire life, and it has had a lot of study done to it to show that it's got historical records too.
Okay, so are there any in the Viking mythology stories that you think have similarities to that story? Do you see similarities between any?
Echoes of it.
Like, what about Odin's sacrifice for knowledge?
Yeah, hanging on the tree, sacrificing himself to himself. Oh, I've got a poem about that.
Have you?
Hung between thought and memory, the one-eyed Aesir drew out movement from mind. Kettle brewed, glaciers sweet, gunlod released. One in the eye for Boggy from the bale worker. Odin's spoil spilled to Midgard, stopping Sutting's slurps. Snorri's song echoes in the sound of stories for those who have to ken. Which is a real, as much as a poem.
I like it. It feels very authentic.
Thank you. So the Odin sacrificing himself to himself one, as a wordsmith and a bit of or aspiring poet, then I can understand the hanging yourself up on a tree. There is a connection between poetry and suffering, and also ecstasy and a certain suicidal tendency. Passionate people tend to be their own undoing. And also the things on the fringes of humanity that draw us on. So philosophy is love of wisdom, but it's not kind of like a sit down with a mug of coffee. It's also you will sit and worry about a word for a week to wrestle its meaning. So all those things, and sometimes Jesus is described as wisdom, or there's one poem about wisdom which sometimes is attributed to that part of the Trinity, and talks of wisdom standing at the doors of our house and inviting people in. How much of that? Yeah, it's dangerous to make direct comparisons.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, and when I start thinking about these things, I go off on long digressions.
this is good because it makes people think.
Yeah.
Which is what stories are meant to do.